afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'd like to thank Xamarin for inviting us to do this, and thank Kimberly-Clark for coming and supporting me in case I get scared by all you scary people. So today we're going to talk about the Kimberly-Clark hazard assessment app and the effect it's had on customer engagement, and largely about building enterprise applications and how they're different. The way you build, the way you design, the way you think about them are quite different from App Store and consumer-type applications. Why it was created, why it's been so successful, what we learned doing it. I'm going to touch on a little code, but it's not really a big coding session. It's more about, how do we do it, what challenges did we hit. And like I said, I'm Grant Davies. My funny accent is from Manchester, but I've lived in Georgia for about 16 years. So Americans ask me where I'm from, and British people ask me where I'm from, because nobody knows where the hell I'm from with my accent. I can still say aluminium properly in garage, so if I start saying y'all, I'm going to go back to England. Kim MacDougall is going to join me on stage in a minute and do a little presentation. She's a senior capabilities manager from Kimberly-Clark. We've become very close over the years in projects. And my wife often asks who's texting me at 9 o'clock at night and who this woman is. So a little bit about our company. We were established in '99. We did a lot of music for television like Cartoon Network. The company still exists and does Aqua Teen Hunger Force and the Archer Show, do a lot of audio, stuff like that. We still work with Cartoon and CNN on different things. We do a lot of tablet, mobile, and web design, like a lot of you guys. And we're primarily referral-based. I was a techie, I was a programmer. I still am when nobody's looking. I was a C++ guy, Java guy, and all that. And I decided to start a company for some strange reason and have employees and all that kind of stuff. And our passion is kind of like, we love doing this. We didn't get into this because it was a job. It's what we'd all be doing if we didn't have it as a job. And I think that's really what differentiates you in this industry, if you really love what you do and you enjoy what you do. Little bragging slide for a second. We've won a lot of awards for what we do. So one of the things we really enjoy is, although we're all techies, we have creative, we have interactive design, and we've won awards for how you use our stuff and how our stuff looks. And that was really important to me because I don't know the first thing about Photoshop. So being able to create things that look good and work good has been awesome. We work with all kinds of companies, from little, small companies that do $1 million of revenue a year to other companies that do $20 billion a year. So we have like the variety of experience on things that we've done. So I'm going to introduce Kim, if you'd like to join me. Her focus is Kimberly-Clark Professional. She used to be a chemist. She still says she is a chemist, but I say really she's a mobile and tablet tester now. And comes up with a lot of this stuff and has become an expert in kind of what we do. So you'd like to join me?
All right. Well, good afternoon. Are you guys alive? It's been a long day. Been a long conference. We just got through our national sales meeting, and I thought I was going to die before I got to go home. Well, you can tell I'm the corporate geek. I come in a suit. So we'll just start with that. I've been with Kimberly-Clark about 26 years this summer, and I've passed through a lot of different types of jobs over the years. I did start off as a chemist, and I think I'm living proof that anyone can get into app building and content management and all the other buzzwords I've learned since I've been working with Grant. But I'm proof you can be an engineer too, so because I've done that. It doesn't take anything formal. You are probably most familiar with Kimberly-Clark through our consumer brands. We've been around a long time, 1870. It's a very large company. We have global scale, and we are very big into global growth right now, as most of the corporate markets are, or the large corporations are. But you know us as Kleenex, you know us as Huggies, and pull-ups, and the things that you see on the grocery aisles. But what a lot of people don't realize is that we have professional sectors. We have a healthcare sector, and then we also have the B2B professional sector that I work for, and we make products that we sell to industry, business to business. So if you don't know Kimberly-Clark, now you do, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about KC from an aspect that you probably haven't thought of before. This is a screen snap from our product selector tool, which is the first version that we came up with, and it's web-based. It's at kcproductselector.com, real fancy name right there. But we make and sell safety products for the protection of people, PPE, personal protective equipment. And we do a head-to-toe protection. So we start off with eyewear, respirators, all types of body protection in terms of particle filtration, chemical barrier suits. Anyone, I don't know if anybody's around long enough, we're in the ricine. You saw where they were getting ricining letters. Do you remember when we had the anthrax right after 9/11, about a year afterwards? There was a picture on Time where a guy was leaning out of the Hart building, and he had on a big suit and the big respirators and all of that. That was my job at the time. I was placing those garments and helping them figure it out. That was a Kimberly-Clark garment. So even though you didn't know you were looking at Kimberly-Clark, you might have seen us in this form in another world, on the news or whatever. But there's some particular challenges with selling safety equipment. You can imagine that there is a high liability. If you don't find the right product, if you don't place the right thing on the right person, then you put them in jeopardy. They're not protected from their environment, whether it's a work or emergency response. So herein comes the issues that we were facing. But Grant threw a slide in here that I forgot. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the industries that we face, or that we are most interested in. We do business with customers like GM and Ford, Boeing, Airbus, Spirit Aero, and a lot of the different large name companies that you know of in automotive and aerospace aviation. We have a focus on metal manufacturing. That's everyone from the welder up to the people who are making the large frames for feeding into the automotive and aerospace industry. Petroleum and engineering. And then we have a little side business that's actually a megabuck business that feeds into the pharmaceutical manufacturing and the semiconductor industry, which is global, of course. So here's the before and after that I was skipping around and now I'm getting to. We had a problem about how we are going to market. So when you think about the safety professional that's in industry, and I'm sorry, I'm all about the user side of it, so I'm really hammering home on that. But our users, the safety professionals, were losing their ability to, for experience. A lot of them had retired, and they are in need of additional help from their vendors to make those critical PPE selection so that their employees remain safe and are working safely in an environment. There are very high costs associated with someone who is laid off because they're hurt at work, right? So there's a big interest in getting as much from your vendors as possible. But we were saddled with the problem that we had a very mundane sales model. The customer, we would meet with the customer, we being the sales reps. We have personal sales reps throughout the US and Canada and actually globally. We've expanded everywhere except Africa right now. They would go on a tour of the customer site, which means I walk through and I look at, you're using this kind of eyewear, you're using this kind of respirator, and I can give you something that's similar to it, but not consulting and not helping. They would figure out what was on the list of the PPE used and then create an equivalent list and swap it out, but not help, not bridge that gap for the end user who's the safety professional and needs to make decisions that are credible and understand the issues and all of the technical information that goes with selecting PPE. So when they followed up with a proposal, it was generally a list of products, a list of prices, and a distributor to help the customer get the boxes in the door, and that was it. If they needed help in terms of finding a product that was appropriate for the hazard, they had to rely on our web-based product selector, which was fine, but not convenient, and usually not where it should be. So, there we go. All right, so we had lots of problems. Number one, with growth, we had poor account penetration, meaning that they were leaving a lot of dollars on the table. They would go in, they would see only what the safety professional knew about or was able to see. When you're working with big companies like Boeing, this can be multiple sites, there can be multiple issues, and you're talking about not a square acre, you're talking about square miles of buildings that needed to be covered and toured, and you were supposed to observe and understand everything. We also have a situation where our sales reps, I mean, when you think about a large sales community, you have a diversity of experience. You have very experienced sales reps at one end of the spectrum, but they may have invested all of their learning in welding and not know anything about respirators. At the other end of the spectrum, you're always replacing sales reps due to attrition. So you've got a brand new sales rep, and we're selling this plethora of products that just goes on and on and on, and they need to be able to come up to speed quickly and become effective in their markets. So they weren't selling the entire product line, and they were adding very little to the customer value to the customer relationship, because they were just walking in with a list of products and walking out with a list of products and providing a list of products and prices. That's not value added. That's not creating the exceptional workplace that we want to help our customers create. The presentation was unsophisticated. It was boring. It was a paper transaction. And when you're dealing with larger companies, and it's larger company to larger company, the way that you look and present is very important. Okay. We also were looking for a uniformity of approach. Again, I've got this diversity of sales reps with different focuses, with different capabilities, and trying to make them uniform when this person's been here 20 years and this person's been here 2 months. That's hard to do. We needed something that was a miracle. So we also had some duplicate labor issues where we had certain sales reps with more experience that were creating their own report. But there was so much variability that fed into the non-uniformity that we were working on. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Grant, and he's going to tell you about our solutions. Thank you for your time.
Cool. Thank you, Kim. So we decided there had to be a better way. So we had to come up with a plan for what this better way was. And I won't do a Mike Myers accent, and my teeth look better than his, so won't worry about that. The business, what the business wanted, they gave us a brief, and this was Kim and her colleagues, basically figured out, we want a rich, creative presentation. We want salespeople to look good, so they need to go in and look professional. A lot of these salespeople have been in the business for a long time. A lot of them, Kim could attest to, they don't know how to turn up their brightness on their iPad. They don't know how to set the rotation lock. We had a problem where a bunch of them had their iPads muted by accident and didn't know how to unmute it. So you can imagine the kind of technical capabilities of some of those guys who've used their laptop for years for doing this. And we want them to look good and not like they're struggling on their iPad, and that they get it and they look polished and sophisticated. We wanted to automate the process. So we wanted them not only to be able to observe hazards in the workplace and solutions, but actually figure out what would be a good product for something that they don't have a solution for. So they're not just copying somebody else. Oh, they got a respirator, they got gloves, they've got apparel. What other things could we solve? We also wanted immediate results. So typically, they could do a hazard walk before. They could go out, take notes, go back to the office, crack out Word, put something together, type it up, print it, email it. It could have been a couple, 2-3 days before the client got what they wanted. Some really good, sharp sales guys might get it out that day. We want it immediate. We want it now. We want to, do it while we're there. Nobody likes waiting. And then we wanted integration with business systems. So We'll touch on it in a minute, but for example, Salesforce.com. So we wanted the Salesforce to be able to manage what they're doing, for management to have visibility to what they're doing, and integrate with the systems they already use so they don't have to go 3 places to do something. Go one place. Do it all in one place, one area. So the technical side of it, and everybody will wake up now. So the content comes from SITECORE, which anybody here use SITECORE, have any familiarity with it? Cool. So for those that haven't, you all guys being C#, of all the content management systems we used, we love it. It's spectacular what it can do. We use Umbraco for smaller clients. We use SITECORE for bigger clients. It's a pretty expensive CMS. It starts around $15,000 to $25,000 a server. But what you can do with it is amazing. It's very much like having a visual editor for databases and then being able to turn that into an administration system that non-technical people can use to put content in. You can customize the admin system. You can customize the APIs. So as developers, it's really cool because you can give these really polished interfaces without having to write GUIs for administration. The tool also had to integrate with Salesforce.com. The Salesforce drives all their leads through Salesforce, so they use opportunities. Anybody else here use Salesforce.com for their? There's a sales guy there, watch him. Wanted to use Google Analytics. We're actually integrating that now, and we're trying to decide if we actually want to use Google. They've got the Universal Analytics, just came out the other day, which we may end up using. The app is getting more and more releases and more enhancements, and it will continue. But it has to work offline. So a lot of these reps that are going into a facility can't get on Wi-Fi, can't use internet. There's privacy concerns, security concerns. So they have to do all their work on the iPad and then sync later. Like I said, we want to provide simple administration. So Kim, although I tease her, she's not a programmer. She's technical, but she doesn't write code. And she's able to manage all the content that's in this app from SITECORE. She's even trained a guy who does this part-time for a few hours a week to help her out and put images and text and descriptions in. And he's not a super technical guy either. And the ability for the customer to be able to manage their own content with it, because the last thing we want to be doing is typing stuff into content management systems. The fact we can let the customer do that and then have it on the tablet has been great. The way it's distributed is via Apps at Work, which is MobileIron under the covers. We're not thrilled with it. It has some challenges. One of the guys here from Hyperion really liked the look of their product, and something we'd like to talk to Kimberly-Clark about. The security is done via Salesforce.com, which uses OAuth 2. So the sales guys can log in through Salesforce to get to the app. The first time they install it, they have to log in. After that, they can run it in a disconnected fashion. And then the new products and media are added to this pretty much quarterly, and that's done through SITECORE, through the admin system. And I'll give you a demo in a minute of how it works. So we had to come up with a process. So as that looks kind of scary, that's the process. The process of doing hazard assessments is a little complicated, and it involves so many different people. And we took something that was really complicated and made it simple and run on here. So the sales process, the way it works is you visit the customer's site, you perform a hazard walk, you capture the customer's needs, that guides them to products that will meet their needs, and then you produce a proposal, and then you send that back to Salesforce.com for closing and tracking. And if you imagine if you're using your laptop and you're using paper and you're having to call somebody like Kim to say, hey, they're using hydrochloric acid and they're throwing it at each other, what kind of apparel should they wear? It's never going to work. So the proposal is generated, and this is a PDF. I'll actually have one open. I'll show you guys real quick. So let me see. So this is actually generated by the tool. I'll zoom in a little bit better. Let's see. So if you can imagine, they go out. It creates a nicely formatted, thank you for letting me come to your business. They fill all this stuff in on the app. It gives them a summary of what they found. It goes through all the areas, so I'll walk you through the app, but basically they look at jobs and areas, figures out what kind of thing they're trying to protect themselves from, the products that go with it and the details, and gives them this shrink wrap, beautiful looking proposal that they can go ahead and email to the client, and then it's got all the legal stuff that Kimberly-Clark requires. So you imagine when the sales guys were doing this themselves in Microsoft Word, it didn't look like this. They were all inconsistent. They're all different. The images were, where the hell did you screen capture that from? This gives them a consistent look and feel. And if this image changed tomorrow, they go into SITECORE, they replace the image, they hit save, you sync the tablet, you're done. Okay. So let's do a quick demo. The app. Let's see. Where did my mouse go? There it is. For any of you guys doing this, I don't know if you've heard of a tool called Reflector. I'm running it on my Mac. It runs on PC. It's great. So you can project your iPad to your laptop. So this is the front page. So I've logged in because Salesforce can take a minute sometimes. And the types of stuff they can do when they hit the little folder icon is they can synchronize. So data is kind of all the questions they're going to get asked to do a hazard assessment. Salesforce is to pull down new opportunities, contacts, all the kind of stuff you're used to seeing in Salesforce. They can pull down videos, and then they can also pull assets. So when they go to a client and the client says, so what's so good about this thing you guys sell and my competitor, your competitor has, they can pull up a video and say, this is what's so cool about our product. So again, they look pretty hip and trendy being able to play a video right there with the client. So it pulls down videos to the tablet. And then assets, it pulls down data sheets and PDFs and things like that to the tablet so they can go ahead and present it. And then we have our demo data we use for debugging and testing. So once you go in, you basically choose a client. And these came from salesforce.com. They were synced earlier. You can choose a contact. You then choose an opportunity, which for those not familiar with Salesforce is how it manages the things you're trying to do and close. So as developers, if you said, hey, we're going to do a website for HBO in Salesforce, that would be an opportunity that you go in and say, hey, I think I'm going to get this project and hopefully close it. And then we have areas. So areas would be things like the shipping yard, the assembly area, the fabrication area, the blood testing, that kind of stuff. Pick an area. And then you got jobs. So within that area, what is your job? So are you a welder? Are you a guy who packs stuff in boxes? Are you a person who, puts blood in a machine and spins it around? So you go pick a job. So this is one I prepared earlier that has a lot of stuff in it. These are all the hazards that have been observed. So we'll go ahead and create a new one just to try it out. And the hazard I'm going to look at is, I'm not going to do chemicals yet. There's a complicated one we'll look at in a minute that's kept me up at night. So flying debris. And I've basically said that flying debris, so somebody's like grinding metal. There could be metal flying through the air. And it's going to affect their respiratory system. So, I've selected respiratory. And once I've done that, I've done all my hazards. So I've kind of selected a lot of hazards. I can also select non-solution hazards. So there's things that we can't solve. But as a benefit to the customer, you can observe things that are hazards that don't seem like a big deal to us, but have liability, like leaving things in corridors, having the wrong type of fire extinguisher, all kind of things like that. So we have all these non-solution hazards. So these are fire-related hazards, which is a lot. And then there's, unguarded cold surfaces. There's all different kinds of things that we observe. We capture those as a benefit to the customer. This does two things. One is the customer's like, oh, cool, you've identified a bunch of stuff I need to look at for me. And then secondly, it also gives Kimberly-Clark the opportunity to say, is there a hazard that we don't address that we should? So once you've kind of gone through your hazards, you go through an assessment now. So for example, the flame and sparks I talked about. I'm going to go ahead. So these questions are coming from SITECORE. And this one was a simple one, so it just said A65 was the product suggestion. And that shows me what products I have available. I can go look at the product. I can show it to the client. I can hit the data sheet, which shows me, all the features of that product. And then I can go back. I can add it to my document, that PDF that we saw earlier. I can go back out. I can go change my answers. The other area that's pretty complex is chemical hazard assessment, which I think I had a slide I was talking about that. It's a fairly complicated thing that Kimberly-Clark provides protection from chemicals, and you have to figure out the concentration and how long they'll be in that chemical. So it could be as simple as janitorial people using bleach, or it could be as complicated as somebody using acid for cleaning or removing products. So you have to go through that. So we had to build that too. And we built a lot of using standard controls. We went through, so let me find chemicals in here. So chemical saturation, I'm going to say the hands need protection. And if I go back to that and then do a start, let me go down to that one. So these are all the chemicals, and I've used we use the standard control, but then you can go search. So if I want ammonia, I can't spell. So I can go choose ammonia as the chemical. And then all this data, again, comes from SITECORE, which is saying this product and all this math and things that chemists understand, this product will protect you from a 99.9% concentration for a certain amount of time, and then you can add that. This traditionally was something they couldn't do. They'd have to call a chemist and say, hey, do I do this? They can now do it on the tablet. So once I finish with my assessment, I go to the output doc. I decide what level I want this document at. So I can talk about the job, which was, like welding. I could talk about the area, which could be the shipping yard, or I can even talk at the whole client level. So imagine a bunch of sales guys go visiting Ford Motor Company. They could provide a proposal for lots and lots of areas, different offices in one PDF, which they could never do before. So in this case, I'll just do it at the assembly area. And this is pulled in, and it remembers what you've done before. And then I can preview the document. And there's the PDF. And then they're like, they look like the slick sales guy stands there and says, okay, you want me to email that to you? And they're done. So they can do it all here. So on the actual device, it's SQLite. The back end is SITECORE, which is SQL Server. That's what it actually runs.
What's the user story if a tablet is ever lost? Is it encrypted, and then you just go and buy that person a new tablet, and all the work just syncs up, and they're up and running in a day?
Yeah, it's all managed through apps at work, so we can lock out the tablet that gets lost, so we can erase it. So they can just remotely set that up. So let me jump back. I'm going to talk a little bit about that right here. With me here. Oh, that was my chemical slide. Said I know more about chemicals than I ever wanted to. So one of the things is, as you get into a client's project, you start have to learn stuff. And I would wake up at night knowing which glove you could protect yourself against sulfuric acid and going, this is not a good thing. I'd rather be thinking about code. And it's just become a running joke at Kimberly-Clark where somebody says, let's talk about chemicals, and half the people drop off the conference call and run away. And to give you, if I ever show you the SITECORE stuff, it's really a lot of data, a lot of complexity, and pretty dry material, to be honest. So this was really successful. The sales guys love it. It's fast and easy to use. It makes their life easier. They look like rock stars when they go in. And it's increased their closure rate. So being able to go to a client and show them all this has increased the time it takes, or decreased the time it takes them to close it. And the customers love it. They think it looks great. We actually polled, Kim's team polled some of the customers. And they all said, this is really good. We really like this. Let's see more of it. And the big thing is the sales guys have seen lots of mobile apps before. They've got, tablet apps that they've been told to use. They don't use them. It annoys them. It gets in their way. Oh, I can do it easier my way. I don't like it. This is the first time that they've used an app that they actually like, that they've actually said, hey, I want more. And they've actually come back to Kim and said, hey, could we do this and could we do that? And I think a big reason for that, I'll talk a little bit in a minute about how we got that kind of adoption. We had existing tools. We had a C#, as I said, based SITECORE server. It was the screenshot you saw earlier for the KC product selector was Flex-based. Once Apple outlawed Flash, you know, we all stopped doing that. But it was a fairly sophisticated app, all written in Flash using remote services. We got to reuse a lot of that C# code in the server, now on the client. It also, just before this project was approved, we got an award for the website, so that didn't hurt in getting this project approved and moving forward. We got like Best Biomechanical for 2012. One of the reasons this was so successful is we involved the sales reps. We involved the user. They're not technical, but we had them involved in the wireframing. So we used a tool called MOCKFLOW and Fluid UI. I don't know if anybody used those tools. So Fluid UI is something I would definitely recommend you guys check out if you do any user type stuff. You can, through a web-based interface, drag and drop controls, design iPhone apps, design iPad apps. And it's, you know, it's just you set hotspots to click through screens. But what it does when you've finished, it generates a QR code. You can scan that QR code on your phone, and it opens the whole design in a web view on the phone, and it looks like the app. So you can actually go to a customer with your wireframes and have them on your phone or your tablet and demonstrate it, just like it's the real app, and say, hey, this is how I think it'll work. Does this look good to you? So we involved the sales reps in the wireframing. We taught them what wireframes were. You know, said, hey, it's not pretty stuff. It's how it should work and how it'll function. We spent a lot of time, hundreds of hours on UX, so they would understand and get through it. And the app now, as you saw, I just did one click on lots of screens. When we first designed it, we'd have them select something and then say continue or yes, no, and there was lots of questions. And they said, that just slows me down. And they wanted to fly through this stuff. So we made a lot of changes to how you use the app based on their feedback. We did about 10 alpha releases, so we had a small group of sales reps that got the app before it was ready and said, take it out, try it out, you know, work with customers that you trust that are okay with you using beta software to play with. And go try it out. Go give us feedback. And they went and did it, and they gave us really good feedback on what we should do and what we should change. We then did beta releases to a bigger group, and we did lots of releases. We used test flight for it all to send it out through that. And then we finally did 3 production releases. We've got another release next week, and then another one in May. So we keep adding features. And you know, we use Scrum, we use Agile, we prioritize stuff, and then just add features to it. The iPad platform that we used, obviously, Xamarin for iOS. I won't get shot, I hope, but we do use other mobile platforms. And we chose Xamarin because it's stable. It works. We like the C# language to write stuff in. So there was a lot of trust in building an enterprise-class app with this platform that we didn't feel confident in some of the other platforms being able to do that. Like I said before, we use SITECORE and Salesforce. So we're a consulting partner with Xamarin, pretty recent. The continuous innovation they do, you know, as you guys, I'm sure everybody was at the keynote. Everybody saw the design tool, and then I don't know who's relieved with the testing tool, but that was definitely something I like, because this app takes about an hour to test a scenario properly when people go. So, you know, having that, the innovation is really exciting to us, that the platform is evolving. And the clear leadership, you know, a lot of companies are very secretive about what they're up to. Xamarin shares everything, talks about everything. I really appreciate that about the organization. I mentioned SITECORE before. It manages questions, it manages answers and video and PDFs. We created a custom mobile packager for SITECORE that takes all the data that's traditionally served through the web through C#-based APIs. It creates a zip file. The zip file includes all the metadata for all the questions, the product data, the product names, the chemicals, all the intelligence that's in SITECORE. We package that up into a zip file on multiple zip files. It's sent down to the tablet, and then it's decompressed and put into SQLite. And we use a few libraries I'll mention here to do that. So we created that packager from scratch, and it's worked really, really well. So in SITECORE, the questions are represented like this. As you can see, typical CMSs, a lot of times they say pages and documents and meta tags and all that. This is part of the tree. And I'm deliberately only showing part of it just because of the proprietary nature of Kimberly-Clark's system. But you can see this is the CMS. There's a question. It understands it's a peril. It understands there's a protection required. It's bloodborne pathogens. And A60 is It's a piece of apparel that you wear, like a suit that you could put on, jumpsuit. Here's the hazards that we talked about you saw in the app. So there's abrasion, there's biological hazards, the parts of the body you need to protect. Again, remember this is SITECORE's CMS admin system. This isn't something I built. This is something we went in and customized through their GUI and said this is how we want it to look. So you can tell this is really readable. It's really understandable by a non-technical person. And then this one's a little small, but this is showing you just a part of the apparel. On the left is the list of products. And on the right, there's the name of the product. There's the image to the product. There's the description of the product. This is all put into SITECORE. And this, again, is what we package up in a zip, send down to the tablet, and it can read it from its database. You know, and the real, you know, if I skipped over that, the real reason is so they can use it all offline. They don't need an internet connection. So we use Salesforce.com to pull clients, contacts, opportunities. We pull custom objects. So we've done a lot of Salesforce customization in the past. One of our clients runs their conferences through Salesforce. So when you register to attend a session, it goes to Salesforce. This one wasn't quite as customized, but we added a new custom object called Area to Salesforce. And for those users that are looking for a really flexible CRM, Salesforce is pretty cool what you can do with it. And the way you communicate with it is like talking to SQL. You can literally do SQL-type queries against it through their API, and it will pull data back for you. So it's very familiar as a developer how to use it. And we push new items and proposals back to Salesforce.com. So once they've done an assessment, that gets pushed back into Salesforce so they can manage it. It's also used for authentication. So like I said earlier, OAuth 2 is used. The Salesforce.com API that they publish is an XML-based API. It's SOAP. It's not great. They had a REST API, and they had a native library for it, but it was a little challenging to use with Xamarin, so we created a native binding for it, and now we can use it just like a native, you know, Objective-C application. Took a little bit of work, but it takes all the headache out of talking to Salesforce. So it handles all the security, handles the sessions. You know, every time you request something from Salesforce, you have to encrypt using OAuth the data that you're sending back and forth. The library does it all. So by having this binding, that made it so much easier. And we may eventually release it as a module and figure out the legalities of doing it with Salesforce. But if they'll let us, we'll probably give it away. The other frameworks we used the Service Stack framework. You've probably seen mentioned a few times. Anybody here done anything with Service Stack? Cool, a few guys. We had one problem with it with this particular version. We're on a slightly older version of Xamarin, and the just-in-time compiler was having issues compiling Service Stack, and you know, because it uses a lot of generics. And so we wanted to use it on the client and the server, and in the end we had to use a REST sharp on the client. But with the new version, we're going to try again and see, you know, if that problem's gone away. As I said before, we use SQLite-NET, which I'll touch on in a minute. And then we use the Tiny Inversion of Control library. And we also use Tiny Messenger. Anybody else use those frameworks? Cool. You guys. So the reason we chose Service Stack is it's fast, it's simple, it's model-driven. If anybody's ever used JSON.NET for things, there's still a little bit of work there. This simplified a lot of that. It supports all common protocols, and you can have the same classes on the app side and on the server side, and it doesn't generate code. It used a lot of reflection to figure things out. And like I said, we had to change a little bit partway through the project for the client side, which we'll probably revisit shortly. Other advantages is you can have strongly typed data transfer objects. There's caching providers built in, so for things, you know, where you don't want to hit the server, it works really well. It serializes C# exceptions, which is a huge relief for when you're trying to figure out what's going wrong. It's so much easier because the framework does it for you. A lot of other frameworks don't, like JSON.NET does not. You've got to handle a lot of that yourself. And we've got some examples up at that link, which is included in the presentation too. SQLite-NET it's a lightweight ORM for SQL. It works with your model and your objects, and it provides very simple CRUD operations. It's kind of ridiculous how easy it makes database stuff work. We really enjoyed using it. So an example here is, I mentioned areas. So on that screen you saw earlier where we pull a list of areas and display them on the screen, so areas being shipping area, packaging area, fabrication area, they're tied to an opportunity. So here's a method we have. You say get opportunities, you have a connection, you say table, you say area. There's a lambda notation. It's going to pull back a list of those areas from the database table. Really silly amount of work. All you have to do is say which is the primary key on your model, and then it uses reflection to figure out what table it is. So if you follow the convention, you don't really have to write any code to say, well, that's the table I want to get it from, and this is what you need to populate. This is inserting an area, so you can see connection, insert area. It's going to create a new record in that table. The other frameworks I mentioned was like LIBZIPARCHIVE. It's a native zipping and unzipping library. There is a monotouch binding for it, but it didn't work. So we did another one. And it makes creating zip files really easy. So a lot of what comes down from SITECORE, like I mentioned, is zip. So we have to unzip it before we can insert it into the database. And then we're also doing some things where the PDFs we generate tend to be pretty large. So we're going to start zipping the PDFs, and they can attach them to email and send them that way. Because, most email systems are 10 meg, and, don't want to go much above that. Like I said before, TinyIOC and TinyMessenger we use, and I've got a couple of examples. Here's an example of the zip side. So you basically create a path to your PDF file. You create a path to your zip file. You save the PDF. And then you basically create a new zip archive. You add the file to it. You close it. And then you return it. And you're done. So, 12 lines of code to add something to a zip and done it. It doesn't really get much simpler than that. TinyIOC. Anybody use the TinyIOC framework? We must be doing the same thing. Yeah. We'll have to talk. You probably got other cool stuff I need. So the reason we really liked it, we used Ninject in the server a lot. We've used Structure. We've used lots of frameworks. I came from the Flash and Flex world, and I use a framework called Robot Legs, which is another injection platform. So I'm a big fan of injection, not getting fancy with it, but for injecting your dependencies like models and views and things like that, it takes a lot of that boilerplate, annoying work out of your hands. One of the challenges we have with TinyIOC is it tries to inject all public properties, which doesn't work well for view controllers because you don't want every public property injected. So what we did is we added an annotation for the keyword inject. So you can see here, we added this, and if we put it above a property, it tells TinyIOC to inject that property. So the way we've configured it now, it doesn't automatically inject every public property. It only injects the ones we tell it to. It's a really simple change. And again, if anybody needs that, we're happy to show you how we did it. One of the other things about TinyIOC is when you're using storyboards, you don't really have control of when your objects are created. The storyboarding control, calls your constructors. And so how you're going to manage injection, well, you can use a method called buildup in your constructor. And if you call the buildup this method in your constructor, TinyIOC says, oh, I better go resolve all my dependencies and all the things I need to inject before we carry on. That allows you to work with storyboards. And something that we ran into at first, not doing it this way, we're like, hey, why is all my properties that should be injected are null? Until we added the buildup method into it. And there's a standard part of TinyIOC. TinyMessenger. Anybody? I think you said you'd use the TinyMessenger too. This is a great thing. I came from the event dispatching world, but again, because of Flex and stuff like that. I did Java, I did C++. But one of the challenges in mobile development is things happen within the app, and you need to communicate that to other areas of the application. And you've got simple events like I clicked a button, I selected something in a drop-down. But what happens when there's a global thing, like I lost my internet connection, the user session expired, somebody clicked an item on the navigation, and I want to change 3 things at once? You need a way to communicate globally across your app. That's what TinyMessenger does. It's really, really simple. You basically create a subscriber. So as you can see at the top, I've got the TinyMessenger hub. I said subscribe for a navigation message. And this is the method or callback I want to call once I get a message. and I've got handle navigation is that callback, and I say new message received. So here I could do some work. You know, I could say change the login to log out, or pop a dialog that says, sorry, your session's expired, or hey, this little progress bar that showed it was loading, you know, that's maybe across the app. If you think of like a lot of bars, you have streaming, you know, if you're playing video or playing audio, I want to basically update that. When you want to publish a message, so here I've got an item selected event, and I just say publish. I want to publish a new navigation message. I want to say which item they selected in the navigation, and I want to pass the item along. So anybody now listening to that message gets it and can process it. Really simple. I mean, if you look, just a handful of lines of code, and then you've got a way to globally communicate across your app. The main benefit is you're decoupling all those type bindings where functions are bound to other functions. You know, if you decide, hey, these views no longer need to be interested in these messages, you can just remove them as a subscriber and you're done. And there's a lot of utility methods in Tiny Messenger like unsubscribe all and that kind of stuff. Yeah? We're really using Tiny Messenger on our synchronization because it happens over a lot of time. On our views and controls, we're generally binding the events, but for cross-screen notifications, so we use storyboards, but in a lot of times we have to break the navigation because of the way the GUI was used. So, you know, you go all the way forward, and then you've got to go back, and sometimes we don't go back to where we came from for specific reasons, and we use messaging for that part of it. So the PDF generation, it's all native. We couldn't find a decent PDF generator that would work with Mono. There was a lot of .NET ones, but they used a lot of code that would not compile with the AOST compiler. So we wrote our own, and I wish we hadn't because it was a lot of work and a lot of pain and a lot of crying. But Kim loves the results, and it looks beautiful. It uses native core graphics and core text. And we may release that as a module. It's a pretty sophisticated generator where you saw it can generate dynamic tables and text and all that kind of stuff. And it's really fast. We generate probably a 20-page PDF with graphics and videos and all the data that kind of gets inserted in there. And we don't use a spinner because it typically completes in a second or two, even for a really big document. So what went well in this? So the kind of things that went well is the overall platform was so stable. As I touched on earlier, we use some other platforms. We get a lot of weird bugs. Weird bugs where you know it's not your code. You know it's the platform, and you're trying to figure out what's wrong. Overall, the platform's been really stable. Monotouch is what we were using, and they've now rebranded to Xamarin iOS, and I'll get it wrong for the next 6 months. But it's really stable, really predictable, and bugs we had were typically our code. I'll touch on one problem we did run into that we worked on, but overall really happy. The native look and feel and the performance was fantastic. And the frameworks that we used obviously saved thousands of dollars. You know, I've used the salesforce.com API and bind it. And just being able to go out and find all those C# libraries out there and just use them mobile is something that you haven't been able to do with other platforms. And then the reuse of code we had from previous C# investments. So the product selector that exists today, the back-end services probably had $100,000 of work in that system that we got to reuse with this platform. So it made it really affordable, to move forward and connect it to mobile. It was web service based, so we just, for new features and new fields and new data, we enhanced it and then integrated it. And hands up who prefers to code in Objective-C. All right, go get him. So what was challenging? Beta wrap updates were a little challenging. So one of the things we found, we use test flight, but getting non-technical users to remember what version they're on and make sure they're on the right version is obviously challenging. One of the things I particularly liked about talking to the guy from Hyperion is they can force a particular version, even when you're beta testing. So something I'd actually like to look at. So test flight, I love. It's great. It's awesome. We used it. We use it for Android too because they just did their Android test flight beta, just came out. But it was challenging making sure. We had bugs, and Kim would call and say, hey, there's this really weird problem, and mine doesn't do it. And then we'd go and say they'd be on iOS 5 and on an iPad 1, and we basically said, iOS 5 is only on iPad 2 and so on. and then the version of the software they're running would be older. And a lot of times you don't know that, so it's using your time to figure it out. We found customizing the UI challenging because one of the nice things about Xamarin is you're very close to the metal, but because you're so close to the metal, building UIs takes a lot of time. So creating custom controls is a lot of work. Using other platforms, which are more web-like, it can be faster. Like I said, there's compromises, so it may be less stable. Just building custom controls was a little bit of a surprise because a lot of our guys that started this were C# developers, or they were mobile developers with other technologies and not necessarily experts in the nib editor and Xcode. So coming to that was a bit of a shock, and the amount of work that was involved. And that was really the iOS MVC development platform. Retaining device data was challenging, so the synchronization we have to do, we're synchronizing from Salesforce.com. Well, you're doing things offline on your tablet. Some of the data you have is in Salesforce.com. Some of the data you created is not, and we have to figure out at synchronization time, what did you create, when did you create it, which one's up to date, and do kind of all that matching and make sure we don't lose any of it. So that took quite a lot of work, but having the libraries and the frameworks obviously made it a little less painful. We did have some challenges re-signing the app for the Kimberly-Clark App Store. So Kimberly-Clark does not give developers enterprise certificates. It's something they don't like. They don't have partners do. They sign the app. So because we use the keychain to store the OAuth token, what would happen is when we sign the app and give it to them to re-sign it, once it was re-signed, it would crash on the iPad because it couldn't access its keychain because the app was modified. So it had been re-signed, it knew it was modified, caused crashes in the keychain. The way we got around that for right now is we actually bought a license of Xamarin for Kimberly-Clark, and their admin guy taught him how to use the tool, and we give him the code, and he actually compiles it and re-signs it. We're looking at other tools to do that. They've got a script, and we're looking at different ways we could do that. One suggestion is to use a developer cert from their app store, but again, there's some red tape getting access to that kind of thing. The TestFlight API, we had some issues with the bindings. Normally TestFlight has an Objective-C library that you can use, but if you're in Mono, you've got to do your own. So we had some problems with the binding, so we wrote our own, and now it works great. So we can do, has anybody used TestFlight here? Yeah. So you can do crash, you can get the crashes, you can get the stack trace, you can get feedback. So we created a binding and got that embedded into the app, so now we know when it crashes and stuff like that. One of the biggest challenges we run into, and something we're still working through, is memory use during binding. I don't know if you guys went to the talk on the garbage collector and memory management. Fascinating stuff, especially when we all, it kind of takes care of itself. And you get to realize it really doesn't. During a sync, we're using about 22 megs of memory during sync because we're pulling PDFs that could be 25 megs. We're pulling videos that could be 10 megs to 50 megs. So during a sync, we're using about 22 megs of memory. And what it was doing is the memory was climbing. The more you synced, the more memory it took, and it wasn't freeing it up. And the problem we were finding is the garbage collector couldn't keep up. So we, first of all, made our code a bit more nicer to the garbage collector to make it really clear what could be collected. So, disconnecting event handlers, setting variables to null, that kind of stuff. And then we found that we had to put a couple of delays in the sync to say, hey, we've done something. Wait a couple of seconds before you do something else. And that actually helped the garbage collector stay up. And so when we looked at profiling and saw memory usage, instead of it continuing to spike, it actually started to flatline and not increase. And then the other one, like Mobile Iron, is an MDM. It's not very sophisticated. Like I said, the red tape of actually having to give the client the code to build it has been a bit of a challenge. Like I said, Aperion looks promising. I don't know if you get to talk to the guy. He gave me a demo. I loved it. I thought it was great. They give you a mobile app. It just works. And he showed like an app installed on the iPad. He's sitting there. He revokes access, and the app disappeared from the iPad. And then being able to force somebody on a specific version of your app so you could use it for beta testing as well as enterprise distribution. So what's next? A lot of it's top secret. mainly because obviously Kimberly-Clark has competitors that don't do this, don't have this, and nowhere near what we're doing. KC is an innovator. They really push the envelope in customer engagement and what they do. A couple of things we are looking at right now that we can briefly mention is we're looking at doing multilingual. So I'm going to be looking at some of the modules that help with that. So there's, partly the translation, but then partly reworking some of the GUI. So when it's in German and it's 75 characters long, so I'll win at Scrabble every time, I can go in and make some changes to that. SITECORE supports multilingual. So one of the nice things there is we'll be able to go into those content pages I showed you and just put the other languages in and then push them down to the tablet. So more info is available on the bit.ly link here if you want to learn about anything we did. And you can check out our site if you had any questions about us. So I just wanted to say thank you for your time. Anybody have any questions? Go ahead.
Services. I don't think this room's quite that big, but yeah. So I'm curious, what you see in the field service market as far as process, process management, process automation from an application perspective. I definitely saw a lot of that in the sales aspect of it. And I'm wondering, in more of the day-to-day process management of someone's, taking measurements and doing things like that. If you're seeing any momentum in there.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Could you repeat the last of the question?
Is it not loud? It seems loud.
Nah.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you're seeing any momentum in the field service application development area, as I'm seeing a lot of sales oriented process management. But I'm wondering if you're seeing or working with more of a day-to-day, how do you say it?
So you mean like an internal app used for somebody to help them with their job and not necessarily sales?
Exactly, not necessarily sales. Really.
Yeah, so we've done some other things like that. So we do work for a couple of clients right now. One of them is a packaging company. Mm-hmm. So they have to figure out how to package and ship something. And after the sales guy has kind of told the customer, hey, we can do it. Yeah. So Ford says, hey, we're going to ship engines, and we need these engines, maybe they've got a chrome polished top to them. They weigh, several hundred pounds. And how do we ship them? So we built them an enterprise app that actually allows the guy to do it, to actually follow a process. So he can go in and say, OK, I'm going to box up this engine and follow the iPad. They use the iPad to actually figure out what goes where and how it's packaged, because it's a fairly complicated process. Yeah. The company does lots of packaging. So it's not just engines. It could be anything. And we built the tool so they can package different things with that. I'm trying to think the other one we worked on. There's a company that does medical machines called the Gamma Knife. We did this a few years ago, and they basically provide these huge machines that a patient goes into, and it uses gamma radiation to treat tumors without surgery. And they have to explain how to service the machine. So again, the iPad app actually guides the service person, because the service person works for a hospital and not for them, and may have to do minor service on it, and the iPad guides them through that. And then I know, I didn't write it, but a colleague of mine did, was Coca-Cola, the machine that they have that does the 100 flavors. There's a very specific set of processes to maintain that machine. That machine's at a burger place and wherever, and that has an iPad app that actually goes through that.
I have a question. You say you use SQLite on each devices, and you have a SQL remote server.
Right.
But your iPads have to work offline as well.
Yeah.
So when they go back online, is there always only one iPad per customer, so there's no conflict resolution to manage? Or do you have any conflict resolution heuristic that you use? Or?
So salespeople go to specific clients and customers, but it does do the merging, so it's not common for multiple people to go to the same company. But the data from SITECORE comes down to the device and is in SQL for static data, product information, all that, and the Salesforce data. Once the salesperson has done their work, there's now dynamic data sitting in SQL that we send back up to Salesforce.com, and it does all the merge resolution. So it's not normal, but if me and you went to the same client and both did a hazard assessment, it would actually do the merge. And there's a whole set of screens that once it gets to the merge, if it has a conflict, it actually asks the sales guy to figure out, do you want to create a new one? Do you want to try and merge it? Or should I forget about it?
How did your salespeople find that conflict screen? Was it complex for them? How did they react to it?
Actually, I mean, that's part of our next, it's actually part of the release we're doing in about a week, so I guess I'll find out. But in terms of, we showed them wireframes, we explained how it worked, and because this isn't the norm, it's more like it's almost like a mistake. They're really supposed to do their homework before they go to a company. They're supposed to say, I've got all my stuff from Salesforce, I've got it all set up, and really I'm just doing a hazard assessment on the app. But if they happen to forget and happen to create a lot on the app and have to resync it, there is the potential for it to happen. But it's not very complicated. It's really, hey, you created a new company called Acme Solutions, and the real company was Acme Inc. Which one in Salesforce.com do you want Acme Solutions to be? And you go pick an existing company in Salesforce and say match it to that. And if it doesn't exist, you actually have to go into Salesforce and create it.
So basically, you have a visual interface for
Yep.
merging. Okay, so the user has to do the conflict resolution.
So
Okay.
for simple stuff, I mean, complicated stuff where we've created an opportunity in an area and some existed in Salesforce and some's on the iPad, we figure all that out. It's mainly that you've created a temporary placeholder for a contact or an opportunity or a client, and now you want to match it to a real one. That's the bit they have to know. And they do. You know, it's their customer, their client. They understand it.
You mentioned that there's this problem with service stack on the client and the just-in-time compiler.
Right.
You've heard that the latest version gets around that?
Sorry, so
The latest version of Service Stack gets around that problem?
I haven't tried it. Somebody today told me that they were using it in production and it works. So we haven't touched it probably in 40 days, I would guess. We spent probably 2 days trying to fix it. And you know, you add where clauses, and if you add where clauses to the code, it helps the AOT compiler figure out the paths when it's trying to generate the static code. And that helped, but we still kept getting weird issues where the AOT compiler would say, sorry, I can't compile this. Obviously more detailed than that. And I just talked to somebody today who said they're using it in the very latest build. And it's not really a Xamarin problem. It's Service Stack uses so many generics that it worked maybe a year ago. Everybody's using it. It's great. We started using it probably January. Started running into problems in it in probably March, stopped using it, and now we're going to go back and try it again with the latest build.
Okay, yeah, thanks, because we've got the same problem, and we're using REST Sharp, so it'd be useful to know if it's fixed.
Are you on the latest Xamarin build? Ah, so maybe it isn't fixed.
I'll find out when I get back home.
Cool.
And to distribute the apps, do you use enterprise deployment from Apple?
So we use MobileIron, which is an MDM. So it implements the pattern that Apple provided. So it has a profile on the iPad. It controls, what app is installed. It allows you to do a remote wipe. It lets you do a remote lock. So they manage it. It's not as sophisticated as some of the other management tools. So it's kind of like MobileIron, AirWatch. I can't remember, it's AppForge or something. All these MDMs. They kind of manage the device. So they're really there to say, can I erase the device? Can I lock the device? Can I track the device? They don't really manage apps. They have something in there to help you with that, but usually they're a web page with a bunch of apps, and it kind of works like test flight. So you see your app, you see the version. It can't tell you whether you installed it before. It can't tell what version you had installed. It's not very sophisticated. So some of the other app providers like Aperion do that. They have a native app that is installed and becomes like the client's app store. And that's definitely something I would, if you've got a choice, that's the direction I would go.
But I guess the problem that we were having in my company is that we were running up to the 100 device limit of Apple, and I was curious how you've gone beyond that limitation.
So the enterprise license doesn't have that limit?
So you did use the enterprise deployment?
Yeah. Any other questions?
On your syncing code on the Wi-Fi network, is that for syncing in like hotels and stuff? Is that okay? Is there ever a case where the Wi-Fi is very spotty and you have a concept of a fast sync or a full sync, or is it a small enough payload that it's like 75K and it just always works? I wrote a very bad tablet PC app, and its syncing was horrendous. It still is because nobody wants to improve it. But that was one of our problems, is that there was just so much over these very bad Wi-Fi networks that it was a problem.
Let me pull it back up for you, so let's see. I was a PC guy for about 14 years, and I've gone to a Mac in the last 7 months, so I still go, okay, which key is it?
My app was sending a data set as XML over a remoting channel with no compression. It's like, it's bad.
So let me see. So when we sync, let's have a look here.
And then on your sync, are you wiping everything off of the client after the client uploads and re-downloading everything, or is it actually doing a merge of some sort?
It's doing a merge. So this is they can delete things. The sales rep can delete things. So they say, I'm done with that client. It's not really deleted because it's back in Salesforce, so it's just not synced. But it does merge. So here where I showed earlier where you can selectively do things, if you sync data, that's SITECORE, we package up the products, the questions into separate zip files, so the payloads are small. We used to do a big one. We had huge. I'll start a sync here, but it takes a long time, but you'll see when it comes up, it says contacting, it says processing hazards, processing questions. So it's basically taking small zip files that are getting pulled down that it's syncing. I don't know if you can read it on there. And we used to do like a bigger zip, like a couple, and if it failed halfway through, it was a disaster.
Yes.
So we recoded it to do smaller packages, and it also has recovery, so if it ever fails with one zip, it'll go try again. Or they can abandon it. We try so many, I think we do 3 times, and then we say just try again later because the Wi-Fi sucks.
Are there ever any problem? Well, is there a pre-check on your sync to ensure that you're always syncing on the latest version of the client and the latest version of the service? So that sort of building?
So in SITECORE, the packages are all versioned. So Kim can go in, and she basically has updated SITECORE how she likes it. As I said before, you can customize the admin system. So the normal process of SITECORE, you hit publish, and that publishes for websites. We added a feature called a mobile package. You hit publish, and it goes to SITECORE, and it creates all the zip files. And it creates one big zip that's broken up later by the services, but it says, here's the package. It has a version, and it's by default, it's set for development. And in the settings for the app, Kim can go in and set, I want the development package, and she can test it out and say, I like it, it's good. She then goes back to SITECORE, marks it for production, and now the next time a salesperson syncs, it pulls the production version, and the first thing it does is say, I have version 1, 2, 3, 4, what version's available, and the server says 4, 5, 6, okay, I'll get it and go from there. But there was a lot of work. I share your pain. The syncing stuff, I would say, we probably have, I don't know, 300 to 500 hours in the syncing technology.
We looked at, there was a Microsoft syncing framework.
Right.
And this was a number of years ago, but it sort of didn't really work. So we had to do a homegrown thing, and it's bad.
Yeah, we found the most luck we've had is small frameworks. Small frameworks are really like Tiny IOC, SQL.NET. That works well. Anything that tries to be really grandiose, usually you're like, it's got so many issues or limitations, or it's people lose support for it or get bored of dealing with it. They're like, okay, I'll write my own.
On your logging libraries, is there like nlog or something on here? So if the application crashes, then it sends you a person was on this form, they clicked on this button. Is that a part of your syncing where it sends those logs back?
So we're using test flight for that in debug mode so that we get much more detailed logging.
Okay.
In runtime mode, we're actually logging to the device, and we're able to logging to the device so it goes into the device log. And then we're also capturing those logs in SQL so it can be sent back to the server so we can take a look at it.
Okay, cool.
Yes. Anybody else? Well, thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Did you try to handle behind-the-scenes synchronization?
Could you expand on your question a little?
Yeah, we have a mobile field services app written on Windows Mobile,
right,
with Oracle backend. It's Oracle Mobile Field Services.
Right.
And we use the synchronization of that Oracle provides.
Okay.
But on the version 10.3 or something like that, the user had to start the synchronization. On the newest version of Oracle, it all happens behind the scenes, so you can configure it that it will happen every so often, or whenever there is a new data, a new transaction has been completed, then at that moment goes and syncs behind the scenes if there is a Wi-Fi connection and the user doesn't know, doesn't realize that it's syncing, because today, but unfortunately, the project got killed and we're still with the user trying to sync.
Right.
And sometimes they click sync without realizing that the phone is off or there is no Wi-Fi.
Right. So we don't do any background. So we do background syncing based on the user's direction. So we do start a thread and we use the C# task feature to do it. If the sync is going on, we have a lot of code to make sure that the user doesn't do something goofy. Okay. We don't do anything without the user's permission, mainly because this app uses so much data. We probably download like 200-300 megs to the device, and which is quite a lot for an app, and put it into the database. So that's one of the reasons that we don't do it without their permission. But we did write a lot of code around the threading to actually say, if it's syncing and they try and do something else, stop them doing it so that they don't screw up the app and get it in an endless loop. And when we first coded it, we did actually run into those problems as part of the beta. People would say, oh, the sync hung and is never completing. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for your time.